In today's tutorial, we're going to cover how we can create the base twigs for our material and how we are going to be able to overlay them on our final result. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. So like usual, we're just going to go up. We're going to create a new substance graph. And we're going to name this one Twigs. And we're going to keep all of our information there. And now we've got our new graph. So I'm going to just bump this up. We're going to add a base material. So I'm just going to create a dielectric. And then once again, just getting our normal and our height information so that we can plug it in and be able to see it in our 3D view. So we want to change this back to fill alpha with input and view in 3D. And now we're good to go. I'm also just going to bump the normal map up to 7 like usual. So now that we've got our output in the 3D view, we can actually start by creating the geometry for the twigs. And I'll just kind of show you the workflow that we're going to do. It's pretty similar to how we made the rocks. We're going to make our first rock, and then we're going to copy that information and paste it and use it to make a second twig. Now, the way that I'm going to go about breaking it up is that we're going to create a single twig first, and then copy it and bring it down and make 2 twigs so that it's more of a V formation in our second parameters for our second twig, just to make sure that there's a little bit more variety and a little bit more of a difference across our material. So to start off, I'm just going to add a simple shape node, and I'm going to go over to our size. I'm just going to scale our X in, and you can see that we're starting to get more of a rectangle, and we want it to be pretty thin. And I'm going to go to change the pattern to paraboloid, and now you can see that we're actually getting a more of a stick or a twig or even like a blade of grass kind of deal. So I'm going to scale this down just a little bit more just to make it thinner, and I'm liking that. So to add a little bit of a waviness to it, I'm going to add a directional warp, and I'm just going to plug this in to the intensity as well, and now you can see it's actually giving it a bit of a curve. And that's kind of the look we want as our base. So on top of that, I'm also going to add another directional warp, except for the input on this one, I'm going to use a clouds 2 texture. And now you can see it's giving it real jagged edges. And that's a little too jagged. I don't really want that. So I'm going to just turn the intensity of that down. And now you can see it's starting to just warp it at random parts so that it wasn't too uniform or too smooth of a bend. And really, that's pretty much it for our geometry of our twig. So now we want to tile this. So we'll again use a tile sampler, and we're just going to play around with the parameters to try and get something that we like. And I want to visualize this in the 3D, so I'm going to just pop it in there. And now we get to play around with what our tiling is going to look like. So I'm just going to skip ahead on doing all of the base parameters for our tile sampler because I've already covered that twice. And I feel like I'd just be beating a dead horse for you guys. So I'll get back to you with the finished results and we can compare on what we got. So I went for this very subtle effect where you can just see that they're bumping off the ground or the surface just slightly. And to achieve that, I went down and I changed the scale just to 2.2, but I changed the random up to 0.74 because I really wanted to get the size of each of the twigs random and pretty different from each other. I also went down and I just changed the position random just to move around our twigs so that they aren't just lining up in a straight line. And I changed the rotation and the rotation random as well just to give it some more variety. And I brought the color way down because I don't want them to stick too far off of our mesh or our material. I also brought up the mask random. As you can see, it's going to do just that. If I bring it all the way down, it's going to show all of our twigs. But if I mask the random, it's going to start taking away some of our twigs at random intervals. And I kind of want to eliminate some of our twigs because I want to be able to see through our twig layer and see some of the underlying materials that we created, such as the mud or the rocks. And so now we've got our first twig geometry done, and I'm going to just take this and then copy and paste it. And now we can go ahead and start creating our second twig geometry. And to do that, I'm actually going to just drag these back and I'm going to reuse them. I'm going to copy and paste this guy right here, our directional. And then I'm just going to transform this warp right here. And so I'm going to just turn it on its side a little bit and bring it off. And I'm going to just bring up the scale so that we don't have it repeating, if you can see vertically. I just want it to be one. So go up to the other corner and we'll scale it up just ever so slightly. And now we've just got one. So I'm going to add a blend on our bottom directional warp because I want to blend these two together. And I'm just going to do screen so that we get rid of the black, and now we've got our two geometries together. Okay. So now I'm just going to finagle with our secondary twig just to get it how I like it. And now you can see that we've got it a little bit in more in a V shape. And then we apply our directional warp onto it, and now we get some of that warping that we wanted. And the nice thing is we've actually already got them tiling because we've copied our information from up top. So I'm going to plug these guys in just to get a view or a visualization of what we're going to be getting. And now you can see we're getting almost the same results, but now we have our V twigs. And I don't like how it's going to be clumping together just like our singular twigs. So I'm going to go and edit this, and I'll get back to you guys with the result. So you can see here for our secondary twigs, I actually masked off a large majority of our twigs because I only wanted to have a few scattered about. I also put the scale up about the same as the last one, and I changed the scale random down a little bit. And I just moved the position and the offset, and I changed some of the rotation so that it's not going to be covered up by our first twigs. So now I'm going to add a blend to blend these two together. And just like we've done before, we want to put them through a blend and then hit screen. And so now you can start to see both of our twigs together. And from here, I actually want to change just how our secondary twigs are positioned, because I want to leave some spots where we've got this open space, if we can see here. But I also want to have that so that they're not completely intertwined with our first geometry. And I kind of like something like this. I think we get the best of both worlds. So I'm happy with that. From here, we're good to go. So we can get rid of our base material, and now we can start plugging these into our outputs. So as usual, make sure to plug in your normal map. We want to add a gradient map to our base material or base albedo. I'm going to plug in a uniform color, grayscale, just so that our material isn't too reflective or rough. For metallic, we're going to do what we've done and create a grayscale black, and making sure that it's set down to 16 by 16 pixels. Then we're going to add in a levels node just to be able to bring that quality of our alpha back up when bringing it in to Unity 5. For now, I'm just going to plug in our grayscale into our height, and then I'm going to add our ambient occlusion output. So now I'm just going to run our normal map into our ambient occlusion and add a curvature smooth, just so that when we visualize this, we'll actually get some information updating in our 3D view. So that's view outputs, and now you can see we've got a very, very black material. And that's to do with, one, our ambient occlusion, how it's very gray, so it's going to bring down the albedo color. But we've also got our just height map running through our gradient map, and right now you can see that we brought down the color of our twigs very, very low in order to make our height map not too tall. And I actually don't like how that's displaying, so I'm going to go back and I'm just going to change the color of our twigs so that they're not too noisy. I'm going to bring the color random down, and I'm just going to do the same for our first twigs. I think for this it's okay to get away with not having random height levels, because they're so small as it is. You won't really be close enough to go, oh yeah, okay, that one's a little bit taller and that one's a little bit smaller. You won't be able to see that detail as it is, so I think we're fine to just leave it. So to start off, we want to mess around with our gradient map. And normally what I've done is gone and actually picked a gradient from an existing image. But because these are so small, I don't think I even need to really waste my time with that. And so I'll just start by clicking and dropping in colors that I think will work. So I'm going to click in and add just a normal gray right down to the very bottom. And what I do is I'll take the very, very farthest left output that I have and put it all the way up to white, just so that I can see what kind of color data I'm going to get on my twigs. So now I can actually change what color I want these guys to be. And so I'm going to go more towards brown and have it be a darker greenish brown on the bottom here. Working my way up, I'm going to just incrementally get to a little bit whiter brown. And now I almost want to have a bit more of a beigey color, because now this is getting to where the twigs, you know, might be scratched and might be exposing some of the underbark that is under the top layer of the twig. And I'm going to change our very top value and bring it over to just an off-white. So now if we start sliding these down, we aren't going to get too much of a variation, and that is due to our grayscale being very, very subtle. You can really barely see our white values. So in order to fix that, I'm just going to add a levels node, and I'm just going to start bumping up our white. And now you can start to really see it take effect on our texture. If we really bump this up, you can see now it's almost pretty white. So a lot of our gradient that we added and we brought down, we want to move that kind of back up a little bit. And now that's starting to look pretty good. And I might bring this down a little bit. And it's really up to you to play around with what you like and what you think looks good. And I think it's looking a little too white. So I'm going to push this back up and give my brown a little bit more leeway to show through. Again, you don't have to be too picky with it because you're really going to see it from probably this distance a lot of the time, and so it doesn't really work in your favor to get too bogged down on the details. So I like that. That's going to work for me. I'm going to save it, and now we can continue on. So for our uniform color of our roughness, I'm just going to bring that down so that you can see we're going to get a little bit of shininess. And because this is going to be on some wet mud, it would only make sense that these have a little bit of reflection, as you can see here. So again, we don't really want to get too bogged down in the details because we're not going to see these as up close, you know, as maybe we will in our 2D texture here. So I'm just going to leave it as is, and I'm going to continue on down to our ambient occlusion. Because for our height, like I demonstrated in the last video, we can just affect these universally by using a levels node right before our height, but I don't want to waste time having to render another node, so I could just go over and, like I did earlier, just adjust it individually in our tiler samplers. So because of that, I'm going to go down and I'm going to add a curvature Sobel. And we're going to work on our ambient occlusion now. So as per usual, we just drag and drop this into here, and you can see now that we're getting our various information. And actually, I'm going to again practice what I preach, and because we're not going to see this too up close, I'm going to get rid of our curvature smooth, and we're just going to use our curvature Sobel. And now I don't really care how our horizon-based ambient occlusion is going to look, because I know that I just want this to be white and I want the shadows to be black. So I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to add a levels node. And I can kind of do this just by eye. I don't really need to reference a ambient occlusion. So I'm going to bring up our whites, really crank it. And you can see we're already kind of getting the effect that we want. Now we can bring up our black, but it's really just going to add a sharp contrast of where our shadows are, and I don't really want that. I'm actually going to bring up our output so that it's not black, black, black. And I like that. You can get the idea of where our twigs are going to be. And if we zoom in, you can kind of see that it's really forecasting where our shadows are. And if I bring it right up, you're going to start to see it increase. So we'll do something like that. I like that. So this tutorial was a little bit quicker because now we're getting into the finalization and the polish steps, and we're having less and less difficult concepts to try and cover. So in the next tutorial, we're going to cover how we can blend together the graphs that we've been making and how we can use them to create a base material that we can import into Unity or Unreal Engine. Stay tuned, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.